All right, welcome back to another PCBH Corner. I am so excited for Dr. Michael Hort to be joining us today. And we've had a really cool discussion even before us hitting record, and even prior during email conversations. And Michael has a new book out. I'm going to put the link in the book into the description of this. But one of the founders, one of the I like to say the OGs of this single session movement. And I am just so grateful to be able to spend some time to pick your mind, to understand some philosophies and some concepts more. So before I jump into my questions, because I'm super excited about this, do you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself, say anything you want about who you are and what's bringing you to this moment right now?
Sure. Hi, I'm Michael Hoyt. I'm sitting here in my home office in Northern California near San Francisco in Mill Valley. And as we were saying just before we started the recording, I'm delighted to be here uh, because I'm excited about the material and I want to pass on whatever can be passed on. I also want to say that while I am the one speaking, say, here with you today, the work of a lot of people informs what I've learned and what I've thought about and some of the things I'm going to say. I especially want to acknowledge, of course, my buddies Moshe Talmun and Bob Rosenbaum. In the middle of the night, a few hours ago, I woke up thinking about something, came in to look at my computer, and there was an email from Moshe, and Bob and Moshe and I have been communicating this morning, just a few hours ago. And Moshe is in Tel Aviv, and Bob is also somewhere in Northern California. So I don't know if it's serendipity or synchronicity or whatever it is, but it's in the air today. So it's fun to be here.
I
Uh,
love the universe when it gives us these moments of whatever
yeah,
full circle or so. Let me
yeah,
ask you this, because this
exactly.
is one of the things that we've really have enjoyed doing within these PCBH corners, especially when we get these opportunities to talk to the people that wrote the book, started these movements and stuff.
Uh,
It's just and I'm going off script now, so I apologize for that. It might be one of the questions that I'd even send over to you. How did you get into this? Was there anything that drew you one into psychology and into this field? And then, how did you
well,
stumble upon this idea?
Well, becoming a psychologist for me was just a natural, well, you get to talk to people and they pay you and it's helpful and all that. I know some people that like computers or like to work with their hands and do woodwork or mechanical stuff. And to me, it was always storytelling, poetry, anthropology, art,
Mm.
that kind of stuff, and never really had an interest in business or mathematics or chemistry or any of that. And I discovered there's this thing, psychology, and I had some undergraduate professors, and then I got into graduate school. And so it just sort of flowed along, or it just seems natural and wonderful. Uh, how I got into the single session stuff, some people already probably know the story, but let me give sort of a very quick nutshell version of it. Uh, in the mid 1980s, Moshe Talmun, Talmon, was a psychologist. He was a postdoctoral fellow in Philadelphia working with Salvador Minuchin. And then Moshe got a job at Kaiser Permanente at a large HMO based in Northern California. And I happened to be working there. When Moshe joined the staff, he was on a child and family team. He was trying to fill up his caseload, but he discovered a lot of people only come, and he began to wonder, why is this? Am I doing something wrong? I've always had a waiting list, and I'm very skillful and good. He is very skillful and good, and all that. And then he was sitting in the the department's office and looking at some printouts, and he discovered everybody in the clinic, whether you're on the adult team, the child team, or the chemical dependency team, everybody, one was the most common length of treatment. People had seen one and then two. One more than that. So he got very curious, and he thought, God, they must be disgruntled. They're dropping out. What's wrong? But he had this interesting, courageous idea. He pulled charts from a lot of different patients and therapists and called 200 people and said, why did you only come for one session? And he discovered that, wow, a lot of people only came once, the majority, because they got what they wanted. In essence, they had not dropped out, they had graduated. I wanted to come in once. I wanted to talk to somebody. I got some encouragement. I got some support. I got some ideas. I took the ball and ran. So, wow, that's interesting. So then we did a literature search and we discovered there are scattered reports of one session in the literature here and there, starting with Freud and goes on and on and on, occasional ones here and there. But then Moshe said, why don't we do a prospective study and offer people one session and see if they want it? And he approached Bob and then he approached me and then we went to Kaiser Permanente, our employer at the time, and so we'd like to do a study of possible single session. They said, single session? Sure, we're interested. And so we and so we approached it. The original idea came from Moshe. I want to make that clear. Although Bob and myself, the three of us all are real collaborators, but we decided right at the beginning, um, let's make Michael the PI, the principal investigator. And that's because I had published, I think, 3 papers, no books or any of that then. And I'm not sure either of my colleagues at that time had published any books yet. And, oh, we'll get a better chance of getting a grant if Michael's the PI. Uh, and so my name was on it as such, but it's really the three of us. It's really Moshe's idea and the three of us working. But it's interesting as I was thinking about this, the 3 papers, I was looking at the questions you had sent, we might discuss. In the 3 papers, the first 2 papers I had published, one was called Patient or Client, What's in a Name, 1979.
Ooh.
Patient or client, what's in a name? And then the second paper was called Shrink or Expander, an issue informing a therapeutic alliance. And then I had begun, we were in Northern California, and it was the mid 1980s, and I'd gone to the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference, and Mental Research Institute was right down the road, and there was DeShazer, and there was Václavic, Weekland, and Fish, and there was all this excitement going on and new ideas. And So I was very interested in all of this. Uh, and so I began to study first in myself, I discovered therapist resistances to short-term therapy. Oh, that's not good because therapy is supposed to be long. It's supposed to be deep. It's supposed to take forever. The doctor or therapist is the expert, all these sort of things. And then as I began to try to teach things about solution focused, about brief psychodynamic, I discovered in the audience, they had some of the same objections. So the third paper I wrote was Therapist Resistances to Short-Term Therapy, 1985. I published it in a psychoanalytic journal of all places. And a lot of this was anticipating, I didn't quite realize it at the time, what we're now calling mindset. What are the underlying beliefs or mindset that the therapist has? Who's in charge? Am I the expert or are they the expert? Are they the client or the patient? I use both terms, by the way. I think in a medical setting, or people that are psychoanalytically oriented, but in a medical setting, it's really good to call people patients. They're patients. And patient comes from patiens, Greek meaning suffering. Sometimes people want to say, oh, we call them clients. It sounds more egalitarian, and it does, but it misses some of the sacred healing relationship and all of that sort of stuff. But patient or client, what's in a name? I thought really got to some of it. Uh, I liked when I read the big chapter that you had sent me that you guys acknowledged, and Nicholas Cummings has also written about this, that
Yes.
we're working in a medical setting, and if we're going to talk to physicians, medical doctors, they're treating patients. They're not treating clients. They're not lawyers or businessmen. There's a patient. There's the idea of the person being a patient. Plus, Cummings pointed out that we bill insurance for patient care, not for client consultation. And so it makes sense that we would be talking about patients, particularly in a medical setting. Either term is okay, but it really gets at what are the underlying assumptions about who's got the power, who's in
Mhm.
control, what changes when change happens. Do I fix people? What does the idea of cure mean? I used to have a supervisor a long time ago that had a sign in his office that said, "Bacon can be cured. People grow and change." This idea of cure, like we're going to go in and fix it.
Can
But
I
yeah,
can I ask you about that? Because this is something you talk about in your book, and it's throughout so much of the single session research and or the literature about I love these conversations. I could listen to this just endlessly because my mind is always fascinated. Like, how did we get here, right? Like, how did we get to this point where very rigidly we believe one, we're going to cure people. Two, therapy, as you said, has to be deep. It has to be long term. And if you almost do something, again, you do a really great job of talking about it in the book and the route. It's like, and if you do something different, like almost like you're chastised for it. And I also want to ask you all about that. Like, how did you all deal with, I'm sure, a lot of different retaliation, a lot of different people being like, oh my gosh, what you're doing is unethical and all
Yeah,
this different stuff. Where does your mind go? Like, how did we get here though? Like
yeah.
what was the underlying things that led to that rigidity of a process?
It's complicated, and I don't mean to make the other side, if there's another side, to make them wrong and we were right and that kind of thing. But having said that, I think some of it is psychologists and other therapists, social workers, counselors of different types, wanted to be junior medical doctors. We wanted to be part of the enterprise. Uh, and so we have to diagnose, we have to treat, we have to cure. It becomes a pathological orientation. What's wrong with them? I think some of that's part of it. There's a part that I could be sarcastic, is more arrogant. I'm a highly educated mental health professional with advanced degrees, and it's taken me 3 years to get my act together in therapy, and I'm still not together. How is some poor schmo going to be able to do anything in 2 visits or 1 visit? So there's that. At the same time, there are people who really do need ongoing therapy or a lot of therapy. And if it takes more than a few sessions, I think it's wrong to say, oh, that means they're getting strung along or they're secondary gain or they're not really trying, or there's all the terminology. But I think we ought to try to right size, and more people, I think, can benefit pretty quickly. Back then, my buddy Simon Budman and I were teaching classes, and sometimes we got yelled at. This is unethical. This is scandalous. This is sealing over. This is some corporate ripoff.
Yeah,
Blah blah
yeah,
blah. All of
100%.
that. So
100%.
we actually wrote a paper called "Fear and Loathing on the Managed Care Trail." And it was sort of a pun or a play on Fear and Loathing. It was a play on Hunter Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Uh, and I say, well, the customer's right, and here's the evidence, and so many people are benefiting. And if we do more short therapy with lots of people, then we'll really have the resources available for the people that need more. Plus, I think we really need to have more resources anyhow. It's not just who gets and who doesn't get, but why does everybody get 10 sessions or 20 sessions, or a lot of people one or two? I had also had my own personal experiences. Uh, a couple times in family, my family, we went when I was an obnoxious teenager. We had something wonderful happen in a session. And then in college, I had a professor that said something that got me to pretty quickly shift my politics. So I realized one session really, or a couple of sessions, something useful could happen. I also was fortunate. I went to that first Evolution of Psychotherapy conference, and I heard a couple of the masters, Haley, Bob Goulding, uh, um, Carl Whitaker, who I had studied with, people who could get things sometimes to happen. At the same time, I'm talking out of both sides. I don't think all that single session doesn't mean some dramatic, life-changing
Right.
enlightenment. Zen master tapped it in the thing. A lot of times people come in, I just want to get some support. I want to check out my thinking. I need some advice on how to sleep better, get my kid to do their homework, or how to communicate with my partner better. And it's not, or I just want to talk to somebody so I don't get worse. Yeah. And so a lot of it is not the big dramatic. There have been a couple times when I did a session and I'd walk out and I'd say to somebody in the hall, if that was on videotape, I could go around the world showing that one. Wow. And and then I'd see the person 3 weeks later and find out nothing had happened.
Nothing happened. It
Nothing
wasn't
stuck.
brilliant. Yeah.
It wasn't so great. And
Yeah.
then somebody who we had some sort of dull, normal, problem solving, talking quietly session, they came back and said, that was really helpful. And wow, it gave me some ideas. And so I don't think it's just hitting a home run or the big drama or something like that.
It's one of my favorite things, and Bob
Yeah,
Rosenbaum exposed us to this during one of his trainings that he did. Was just think about a time in your life that someone said something or did something that it wasn't intentional, it wasn't planned, it happened by accident, it wasn't a long conversation, but it pivoted where you were going. It changed your trajectory. And I always think about, and I always text my fellow college, one of my roommates who I played basketball in college, and he had this very quick conversation with me, and it made me see that, hey, everything isn't about sports. There's other things in life, and that changed my trajectory completely. And as your point, it wasn't like there was this divine moment. The clouds parted and everything came and it was like, oh, this is that moment. It was just a conversation that was pivotal
Yeah,
in
yeah,
it. So I always love how this approach really does honor that what humans experience, which is like, hey, something could happen right now, and let's just see if it does.
yeah. There's no time like the present. In fact, there's no time but the present. It's all going on. The past is in my head, the future, but it's all really right now.
Mhm.
And it's not how far back the problem goes, but how much farther forward, further forward, whatever the word, how much how much longer you're going to carry it forward until you do something different. There's things like, if you don't change directions, you're going to wind up where you're heading.
Yeah,
More of the same doesn't make a change. The definition of insanity, doing the same thing over
same
and
thing.
over and expecting a different result. There's all these little slogans we have. And so sometimes people get to the point, I'd even say, the fact that you're here today tells me maybe it's gotten bad enough you really want to look at it and figure out if there's a different way to go. Because if you keep doing more of the same, you're going to get more of the
Mhm.
same, which is basically the Mental Research Institute's view of things, that the attempted solution actually perpetuates the problem,
Uh,
rather than doing something. But how's that been working for you? Like Dr. Phil would ask,
yeah,
how's
yeah,
it working for you? If it were really working for you, you wouldn't be crying your eyes out on my couch here on TV. So it's really sort of a motivational interviewing question, like, oh, yeah, you're right. I've got to do something different because it's not working. Well, maybe just stonewalling some more, or drinking some more, or yelling at your partner. So, no, that's not going to work. I've tried it for years. But that,
and
yeah,
oh, sorry for interrupting. Can
oh,
I,
please,
the
yeah.
the one thing that you also said a couple minutes ago about what this approach can do, and this is another reason why, as we were talking before we even started, about why I get so excited about this in primary care, because again, primary care is supposed to be this first contact for people where the masses can access care. We don't have something like that within the mental health system. The only thing that we know, and obviously this is pointed out regularly, that will guarantee someone getting care in the moment is that if someone's in crisis. That's the only thing within the mental health system that we can guarantee access within it. And I remember talking to Alan Francis, who, he was one of the developers of actually the DSM-4 and wrote a great book, Saving Normal. And he said this too about our approach to this. One of the things that's been, if we don't change what we're doing, no matter how many more people we add to this
Right.
thing, it is going to continue just to have less and less access because we're not changing what we're doing or approach to that. So I really love how you all have said that. It's like it's not to say that some people might not benefit for multiple sessions or multiple visits. It's just saying let's see what we can do right now for a large group of people.
It's really a scaling question, among other questions, the scale of things. The woman who is the director of the SST5, Single Session Therapy 5 conference in Chicago, Jessica Schlater, has written about this. I forget the exact numbers, I don't want to misquote her, but if we got 10 times as many therapists as we have now, it would barely make any dent.
Correct.
Uh, and so we have to do something different, not just do more and more and more of the same and hope we can catch up with it. There's an enormous need for some kind of services. In addition to that, my words, not hers, but I think she would agree, we need to change the way we approach it. Not just We need to change the way we approach it to use the clients or the patient's skills much more. In the world, you're asking before about how we got here. The word diagnosis.
Buddy.
Diagnosis comes from via nosos. Via means way, like dia, and nosos means knowledge. And so a good diagnosis is something that points the way to help the person. It's useful knowledge,
Oh,
as opposed to a lot of what diagnosis. Oh, she's a borderline. Oh, he's a narcissist. Oh, they're histrionic. Oh, they're dependent. They're paranoid. I do believe there are people who are consistent with those diagnoses and the way they continue to act over and over in lots of different situations. But a lot of it becomes name calling, and it just further disempowers the patient or the client rather than how are we going to join with them and find what they can do that could be useful. Even people who qualify for personality disorder diagnoses, even those folks, there are secret strengths. The person who we say is histrionic, they used to say hysterical, but the histrionic, oh, they're very sensitive and emotional and in touch with their feelings. And the person who is a narcissist, well, you take a lot of pride and want to do things as well as you possibly can. And the person who's obsessional is good at noticing small details and following instructions carefully. And the person who's dependent may be somebody who can figure out who in their situation could be helpful to them, who they can depend on. Uh, I I don't want to play it too much, but
Well,
it's
here's the thing. What I want you to play it all day long because this is one of the big things that obviously we've talked about before is that, being a functional contextualist, my belief is like, hey, everything serves a function within their context, right? And what
right.
a beautiful thing. And I never had heard this language until getting into the single session literature about rather than focus on psychopathology, focusing on psychohealth. And focusing on, what is the purpose, the function, or whatever this individual is doing, and then building off of that. I remember, Kirk Strassel, my mentor, he always said, hey, it's a lot easier to, what do you say? It's a lot harder to get someone to stop doing something than it is to work with what they're doing right now and to work with them. And so it's an interesting thing that we do in psychology and mental health a lot of ways, because it is about like diagnosis. We got to stop that. We got to make there's no point in those symptoms. They don't serve a function. They're harmful indiscriminately. And that just gets us down rabbit holes. One, it gets down the curing rabbit hole that doesn't seem to be working too well for us, speaking of that question. And it
Right.
just is something that doesn't seem a very humane way of approaching the people that we get to serve.
The other night at my house, a friend of mine brought a colleague of his for dinner. We had a very lovely dinner, and the colleague is a woman from Poland. Her name is Marta Nowak Kulpa, and she wrote this little book.
Ooh.
It's an interesting little book, but she works as a psychologist in an oncology unit.
Mm.
Uh, People have terrible cancers, and sometimes things have to be their nose and all. And a question she asked lots of the clients, particularly the patients in that setting, particularly the folks that are being very difficult, she says, "What do you need now to feel better today?" It's like rather than blaming the person, oh, they're being difficult, they're a pain in the ass, they're demanding, they're passive aggressive, they're doing probably the best they can given particularly what they're up against. What do you need now to so you can feel better today? Looking at the context and what problem are they trying to solve. Harry Stack Sullivan many years ago said the same thing that what we call defense mechanisms, he called coping strategies. And this is the way the person is learned to deal with things. And this is the best they can do. And it may not be effective in getting them what they really want, and they would do something different if they really knew how to do it. But oftentimes they don't. Uh,
And for me, I'm sure it has for you. For me, approaching care this way, it prompts so much more joy with the work. Because I tell you what, when we're able to contextualize and normalize what someone is going through and maybe make sense of why, or as much as we can, of the behavior, we always talk about like self-compassion and all this different stuff that is really great for therapy lovers, and there's a lot of times with us just being able to normalize and contextualize and make some sense of it, compassion naturally grows within us. Like we don't even have to talk about self-compassion. We don't even have to do an intervention on self-compassion. That can normally grow.
Yeah, so it becomes a search. Bill O'Hanlon and I'm blocking a name right now. It'll come to me in a few minutes. Michelle Weiner Davis wrote a book in search of solutions, a new direction in psychotherapy. And it's similar, different, but similar to some of In Search of Solutions, O'Hanlon, similar to what Steve DeShazer talked about, solution focus, looking on strengths, looking for when the problem isn't a problem. What were they doing? What are the exceptions to the problem? Oh, 6 days a week you drink. What's different on the seventh day? How do you manage not to? Or some days you're feeling this, other days. Try and put difference to work, looking for a positive. It's such a different way of thinking, but we have been so trained, and I do it too. Uh, I walk around and in my mind I'm DSMing people sometimes. Oh, there's so and so and there's so and so. Yeah, but I think it's tricky. I know it's like you'd written me I made a comment about looking for the donut, not the hole,
Oh,
which is a term I've heard generally. I like it, so I use it. Look for what's there that could be useful rather than what's missing. Sometimes what's missing is important, but the donut instead of the whole. Um, it was in a conversation I had with Steve DeShazer, one of the developers of solution focused therapy, and John Weekland. It was Steve who said most of us function as mental illness professionals, not mental health professionals.
yes.
We're looking for what's wrong. We're looking for illness. The idea is we got to identify it, expose it, bust it, and then maybe something it doesn't get much cooperation from people.
No.
They become resistant. You're blaming me too, and all of that. And as you said, it's not a lot of fun. It's like, oh, I know there's a pony in here somewhere. I'm digging around in the muck, kind of thing, as opposed to people coming and feeling that you appreciate them. There's something uh, positive about them. I noticed when I was watching videotapes of you and Bridget that the two of you, I, I was already halfway in love. I want them to be my therapist. They smile, they're affirmative, they're nice people. I feel they're going to help me. I think there's a lot to that when people come in, we're mental health professionals and know a lot about it and have seen 100 presentations and read the books and all that. But if you have a personal problem and you go to see somebody, how they greet you, how they look at you, do you feel you're going to be exposed for the failure that you are and the rotten mess you are? Or do you feel like they're going to find something valuable and good in you? It's interesting when you recognize and accept the good in people, uh, they're more willing to even talk about the problems.
Yes.
A fellow famous person in our field, Jay Haley, I like to quote Jay. Jay was once asked, I saw it in an interview. I knew Jay, not real well, but we had dinner a few times and talked and things. But Jay was once asked, what is the most important thing when you work with a client or a patient? And Jay's answer was, love your
Yeah.
client. If you
Yeah.
have love toward the client, and he didn't mean romantic, sexy love. He meant, namaste. I see the divine in you, or I respect you, however you want to say it. But if you see that, the rest, he said, will fall into place. But you have to start with positive alliance or connection. Uh, Bob and I have talked about this a lot, and Bob Rosenbaum has his Zen Buddhist background, and he has a way of thinking about things, and so I think that's very,
You know,
very
Mike,
important.
I wish I could show you. I won't turn my
Mhm.
computer, but it's something I picked up from Bob, and it's that we ask our trainees to ask themselves two questions before they enter a room. And the first one is, how can I enjoy this human?
Right.
How can I enjoy this interaction with
Yep.
them? So I have it up on my whiteboard, every single thing. How can I enjoy this human? And the second one is like, how does this person make sense? How does this person make sense with what they're going through? And it is amazing when you take that stance what is retrieved from the human sitting across from you, right? That, oh, this person's engaged, they're excited, they want to get to know me, there's fun that's there. It's a completely different interaction versus, as you said, if we're focusing on the hole in the donut, what's missing?
Yeah. So I think the SST, single session therapy mindset.
Ooh.
Uh, Lots of people have written about this, and it's all very good. And this other new book recently came out that I
Oh,
co-edited with Flavio Canistro. I'll send you. Uh, we've been waiting for Rutledge to send us some copies, but I'll send you the information. Single session therapies, why and how one at a time mindsets are effective. Uh, how we, and different people have different way of framing it. But to me, the SST, single session mindset, has a couple of uh, features. One is the idea that change is possible now. So I'm going into the room and whatever's going on, this person could make some change with some facilitation, help, support, whatever. It's possible for them to make some change now. There's no time but the present. A second is to approach each session one at a time. OAAT, one at a time. And this is one of the big misunderstandings about single session therapy. The single session therapy mindset is we're going to have a meeting today with a beginning, middle, and an end. It may be complete unto itself, but one at a time does not necessarily mean only one time. They might
Correct.
come back for another session in a few days, in a few weeks, maybe never, maybe who knows. But to approach each one as complete unto itself, a complete unit, if you will. Uh, so that's the I want to have a beginning, a middle, and end. What build an alliance, get connected. What are the next steps? Uh, uh, how can I be of help? Let me know how it goes. All of that. So that's sort of a second. Uh, the third is the session is largely driven by the client's goals, resources, uh, uh, the therapist adds lots of things. I know about ACT, I know about SFBT, I know about CBT, I know about all this, and I can add stuff to it, but it's largely in service to the client rather than they think that's the problem, but the real problem is, and the real solution requires me to have read and all that. And then so the fourth is what the fourth characteristic. I have a shorter way of saying this, which I'll do it in a minute. But the fourth characteristic is what Moshe called constructive minimalism. Constructive minimalism means focusing therapeutically on what would help the client now rather than primarily looking at diagnostics. Uh, constructive minimalism is a term that came from De Shazer, and De Shazer got it from Ludwig Wittgenstein, I think. And I'm not positive about that, but I'm pretty sure. And I'm sure it goes back, back to Aristotle or God or somebody. But constructive minimalism is looking at what needs to happen now to help this person rather than just trying to figure out all the nooks and crannies of what's wrong and how they went wrong and all of that sort of stuff. To put this mindset in a more colloquial way, I think number one is respect. As you approach the
Mm.
person with respect, primary attention is being given to them as a human being
Mm.
and to their goals and abilities. I see a person here. The second thing is the idea of hope, the affirmative belief that change is possible, uh, that something is within their grasp. In Scottish, they'd say in their keen, in their what do you call it, range of knowledge, but that there's something they could do differently. So one is respect. The second is the idea of hope. And then to me, the third is the idea of joy, that it makes me happy, that there's some energy, excitement, feeling of delight and happiness. Uh, I think that is tough. Uh, those are the things, but to hold on to those in the face of all the stuff we have to deal with. I'm looking at on my table here, I made a drawing and I can't find the darn thing, but it's in the book. Here it is. It's in the book. Uh, Sometimes I talk about when I'm teaching a context of competence. Uh, and hard to see this.
Oh, I can see it perfectly. Yeah.
Okay, so context of competence. I've drawn three circles. I'll hold it up again. It looks like the three, like the Olympic circles, and there's three of them. It's a Venn diagram. And the three circles are labeled alliance, goals, and resources. Where the three overlap is where I think therapy takes place. If somebody came in and you formed a nice alliance with them, mutual admiration society, like one another, at ease and all that, and you talked about their resources, what they're good at, how they've solved problems. But that would be nice, but it wouldn't be therapy because you're not focusing on dealing with anything, solving something. If they came in and you connected with them and you talked about their goals or their problems, what brings you here now, what do you want to get from today's meeting, well, all of that stuff, and you never talk about their skills, their resources, their abilities, you, therapy's not going to take place. It's going to be a diagnostic interview. Tell me about
Right.
your misery, but we're never going to talk about what to do about it. If they could themselves connect their goals, if they could connect their goals and their resources on their own, they wouldn't need you. They've come to therapy because they don't know how to solve the problem. I got to go talk to somebody. I'm stuck. This has been going on too long. I'm going to lose my marriage, my job, my health. I got to get some help of some kind. So the therapist in the alliance, we're not just, well, we're allies working toward a goal together. We're allies, but it's our job primarily is to help the client bring together an awareness of how they can deal, what they've got to deal with, and how they can better deal with it. Uh, yeah.
Michael, it makes me think one of my favorite humans is Deepu George, who's a marriage and family therapist in Texas. And I'm going to try to make sure I say the quote right. I can't remember if it's exactly. He's like, what we need to do within our work is we need to return humans to themselves and return us to ourselves. And the thing that you were just describing there is often this idea of us like being able to hold up mirrors at times and being able to let people know about their, again, as you said, their resources, their goals, their values, and to be just there with them, helping problem solve that alliance piece. I love that.
And that's what gets lost when you're really stuck. I mean, like you have up on the wall, enjoy this person. But when you're really stuck, if you're a client or just a person, and you're stuck, you lose. How have I ever solved this before? What am I going to do? Somebody came in my office a while ago, and some bad things had happened in their past, and they were quite distressed by them. And I said, those things are past. They happened, and I'm sorry they happened. They're terrible. But right now, the only place they're happening is inside your mind. It's like there's a scary movie going on in your head, and you're playing it over and over. And there's reasons you're playing it over to try to figure it out, to make sure it doesn't happen again, to cope with it. There's reasons why people have a scary movie playing in their head. Let me ask you though, if you could tell yourself it's just a scary movie, I'm not going to let it stop me, what would you be doing? Well, in that case, I'd be going to my daughter so and so. And I didn't say to them, but I said that's acceptance and commitment. You've accepted it. There's a thing going, but what would you do if you didn't let it take you over completely? So it was funny for them because I was scared. We had said something about movies. They had asked me about something about movies. So we had the movie metaphor, if you will, or the movie image. But somehow to put it in a person's frame so they can understand it and feel empowered or feel I am bigger than this problem. I may have problems, but I am not defined by the problems. And so we found sometimes this could happen in a one session therapy. Isn't that nice when it could really happen in a one session therapy? We didn't, hide the uh, I've been writing my presentation I'm going to give in Chicago. I've been working on it, and I have I'm not going to actually show the video clip, but it's the first minute of the first session in our single session therapy project from 1985 or six, and I have the video of it, and it's me sitting
Oh,
down. And the first moment, I said, "Hi, as we sit outside, I'm Dr. Michael Hoyt. The purpose of our meeting today is what in our department we call an intake. It's briefly to find out what problems you're having and then work together to figure out a solution. If we could do that in one session and could figure out the next steps, would you be interested in that? Eh? The A is Canadian, by the way. But yeah. And it's like, wow, there it is. It's like, and it's an invitation. Somewhere in my book, I say, insistence produces resistance, imposition produces opposition, and push produces pushback. So you don't want to insist, you're only going to get one shot, you better hit it. And if you don't want to do it, it means you really like it. And da 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 da, what do you mean? I don't like, or what if I need more? I'm entitled to 20, aren't I, doctor? Or I'll pay. And so I think it's very important that we don't insist, but we invite,
Oh,
that we put it out in a way that's user friendly, if you will, or an invitation. Well, given all you've been through, no wonder you're feeling, been going through all of these feelings. And at the same time, I can see that maybe this has gone to the point you're ready that you want to consider a different way to look at things and maybe deal with things a little bit differently. Would that be of interest to you? Tell me, how have you tried to deal with it so far? How's that been working? What's worked? What hasn't worked? Uh, yeah. So I think it's
I
very
and I love that. It was one of the most profound things I remember, within the PCBH model, we try to, do as many different things that we could do that standardize just because, time is of the essence and, working in primary care, you're always oppressed for time. And I still remember Kirk, again, giving that feedback of, hey, within your introduction, give that invitation that you might get everything you need out of one visit. And you might want to, come back as well. That's totally okay. We'll discuss that at the end. And I love that. That was something I never heard about before, about that invite. And I forget the research that was discussed. I know Bob quoted, I think you probably quoted in your book as well, that when we give that invitation, that you might get everything you need out of one visit, people have a higher likelihood of believing that. That it's like, oh, okay, yeah,
absolutely. Oh yeah, I'd be interested in that. And
yes,
even if it's not one visit, then it's, oh, maybe just I may not, one may not be enough, but maybe I could just come a couple times and check it, as opposed to, well, with these problems,
buddy,
and yeah,
you're really messed up. You're gonna
sure.
really need a
Yeah,
lot of,
you broke from the get-go.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, it's very difficult to talk about. I mean, it's fun to talk about, but it's difficult in the sense that um, when uh, when Moshe's original book, here it is, sitting right by, sitting on, well, when Jerome Frank wrote the introduction to the book. And Jerome Frank was a psychoanalyst and psychiatrist, very prominent at the time. And he supported the book. He was in favor and wrote an introduction. But he pointed out that this really challenges a lot of the assumptions. He didn't call them mind. I don't think he used the word mindset, but therapy should go slow. You don't want to stimulate resistance. You have to build alliance. You have to take a lot of history. You have to do all of these sort of things. Uh, and it's such a shift in thinking
yeah,
for therapists. Um, there's also the economics. People who work in clinics and medical settings, the shorter the better. Somebody once wrote a paper called "The Survival of the Shortest." It's, like the survival of the fittest, Darwin. But the survival of the shortest. But, oh yeah, the more efficient, the quicker, the better is good. People who are in fee-for-service private practice, my friends go, why would I ever want to do that? And I'd be having to sign up 30 new people every week, and et cetera, et cetera. I don't think they're ripping people off or stringing them along. They're trying to give value. But if you start with the assumption, uh, I think it was John D. Rockefeller who said, if a person thinks they're going to be a success or a failure, they're probably right.
yes, yes,
And you have sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Um, the P.G. Wodehouse wrote I'm a golfer, and wrote a funny book about golf. And he has a character who thought that par was the maximum number of strokes you were allowed on a hole. So he would assume I've got to get it in three or four, rather
that
than
would
that's
be
what
a
it
great way to
actually.
golf.
Yeah, well, and it changes how you think about things. But this whole field of the single session therapy, um, we got some pushback, but more and more evidence is coming in. Now there are books in English, Spanish, German, Japanese, um, Dutch, Swedish. I think I said Japanese. There's a Hebrew from Moshe, and I'm sure Moshe's book was probably translated into 20 or 30. So we're also seeing now research coming from all over the world, uh, including people go from certain other cultures where, yeah, when you have a problem, you go and you talk to the shaman or the healer or the wise woman or wise man. You don't expect them going Tuesday at 10 every week for the next 5 years. It may be an all day meeting, it may be a 3 hour meeting. I may have to prepare myself by fasting or meditating or wearing my special clothes, or they will give me things to think about, and then I will have time to process this in how I use it. And so we're seeing not just the Western model of psychotherapy, it was largely developed on Americans and Europeans
Right.
of a social class, but also there's other ways of solving problems in one visit or in a couple of visits, around the world. And so
You
it's
know, and this is why I love, and you quote him regularly. I love Jeff Young's work and from
oh
Australia,
yeah,
no bullshit therapy, and how we divide about like therapy lovers versus therapy haters,
oh yeah,
and
yeah.
again, and it's a big thing, especially working in a primary care clinic where, mental health, it is the de facto mental health system. And, I work with a very rural population. I work with a farm working community as well. A lot of people that therapy wasn't designed for, wasn't kind of like thought of within it to have this other approach. And my mind just says, and maybe it's bad to say, I'm just going to say it anyway, a more humane approach to dealing with what life throws us, I think is a beautiful thing.
I don't think it's a bad way to say it. I think it's a therapy would be brief. People have to be trained to make it long term. Uh,
Oh, whoa. Say that again. Say that again.
Most therapy would be brief, but people need to be trained to make it long term. Both the
That
therapist,
might be the title of
that
this.
might be the title of the thing.
Oh man, that is
I think I'm
great.
paraphrasing something that Dick Fish from MRI said. I can find it for you and write it down and send it. What was that, Michael? And I'll find the exact quote. But I think there's going to be a lot of developments that are coming. Wanted to mention a few of them. Uh,
Yes.
One is, I think more and more we're going to be seeing more so-called single session therapy. And I want to emphasize, single session doesn't mean necessarily one and done, but it means one at a time.
Yes.
Let me even back up. Before I say what I think the likely trends are, here's a couple of things I would worry about that I don't want to see happen. That would be a good one. I wrote a note to myself, and once again, if you saw my desk, you'd wonder how anything gets done here, but somehow it does get done. So one is I would have a worry there's a lot of evidence coming now. Single session therapy has been helpful for lots of people with lots of problems, and not only simple problems, complicated, difficult problems, people, all of that. So one worry I have is that some people could say, okay, you get one session, but if you're not fixed in one, that's all you get. One and done, one and out. And that would not be fair. So I don't want it to be single session took over and replaced everything. Insurance will only cover one or that kind of thing. Another is I would be worried that there would be only one model, the horse race, which is the best single session therapy. Is it that focused ACT? Is it really solution focused? How about REBT or CBT? And what about all the good stuff the narrative people are doing? And don't forget psychodynamics and what David Malin discovered and da, da, da. And so I think it's important. One size doesn't fit all. What would work best with this therapist, with this client, in this situation, at this time? So I think those are things I would be worried some about. But where I think some of the developments are headed now. One is we're going to be seeing more single sessions, some by appointment, but I think especially by the not appointment, the open access, walk in, click in, drop in. Or I was going to see my medical doctor, and I said, maybe you ought to talk with one of our psychologists while you're here, because they can give you some ideas of how to cope with this better. Cummings was one of the first people way back when who discovered the medical utilization offset phenomenon, that unnecessary medical utilization went way down if people had even one or two visits of psychotherapy. And it makes sense because once you get past broken bones, most medical problems, even cancer and
Correct.
diabetes, have a
Correct.
big psychological, I'm stressed out, I'm not sleeping, medication compliance, worrying, all of these sort of things makes it worse, or they can get help to make it better. Uh, Nick Cummings was very pleased and proud. He told me, and it's in an article in a book that I edited. Um, it's sort of a little funny going sideways story, but the first chief psychologist at Kaiser Permanente was Timothy Leary, the LSD guy. And
Ah,
he actually was a psychologist, and he wrote a good book on psych testing. And then he went off into his other endeavors. After Tim, Kaiser was pretty unhappy, but he kind of blew out. And so the chief of the head of Kaiser, a man named Garfield, uh, hired Nick Cummings and said two things. One is, if you screw this up, I'll never hire another psychologist. Well, yeah, that was one, basically. But he also said, I want a psychologist, not a physician, to be in charge of, of psychiatry and psychology, because a physician will only be writing, the temptation will be to write prescriptions, and I want somebody who deals with the whole person, psychosocial, family. And so they wanted to have somebody like that. So Nick was told me this, and then he said, when in Northern California, where I live near San Francisco, there's a lot of cities, and there's a city called Walnut Creek. Walnut Creek is across the bay from San Francisco. It's a suburb of San Francisco. And there's a large Kaiser Medical Center there. When the Kaiser Medical Center opened in Walnut Creek, the head of Kaiser was there, and he said to Nick in front of everybody, I want you to know that the money that was saved by offering mental health services paid for this entire medical center. It cut medical costs in half. And with the money we're able to save, we're able to provide more services to people. Lovely. And that's one of the ways you sell psychology
oh
uh,
yeah. Oh
uh,
yeah.
to the overall enterprise. It's not medical versus mental or physical versus, no, that, I mean, there is a reason why the head is on top of the body. It does run things. It's bipedalism, and it's to see what's coming and all that. But still, this idea that good psychological mental health services will really reduce medical suffering and medical costs is very, very important. So I want to emphasize that. I think there's going to be particularly more clinics. I already mentioned that. Because it's easier to do it in a clinic setting as opposed to the individual private practice guy. I can't just keep a thing open and hope somebody drops in, that sort of thing. Uh, my third point says here, the economics are ripe, and as David Bauman and Bridget Beachy and others have noted, single session thinking could revolutionize primary care. Hard to argue with that one, I'm sure. But I think it's true, not just uh, uh, it's not just saying it, but yeah, it's the whole idea that here's primary care, the first care, they're here. This is our best first shot. The first cut is the deepest. All of those ideas. Let's make some difference. I think there's going to be more online.
Yeah.
I myself am not a I'm awkward with the computer and all that, but I think there's going to be both more online counseling therapy, and then we're going to hear a lot about it in Chicago, single session interventions where people can access services and not even have to deal with a therapist directly, but self-directed, programmed. And it's great, particularly for young people, because
Yeah.
that's live online. Click, click, click. I want to get some ideas about depression or drug abuse or dating or sexuality or whatever it is that they want to read about or hear about and talk about. And that will also encourage some people to see a therapist face to face, whether in the room or online. There's a lot of people who can't afford it and don't have access, and
Yeah.
I'm out in the country somewhere, and the nearest therapist is 100 miles away, and I don't have a car, kind of thing. So I think it's particularly someone I know, Suzanne Fazard, who wrote a wonderful.
Oh, incredible. We got to know Suzanne a lot.
I
Yeah.
know, yeah, I sent you. She said she described your program as SST on steroids, and Suzanne's great. She's going to be in Chicago. Suzanne has been in this very room that I'm sitting in here. We, spent some time together with her husband here, and they were traveling, and she went around
Uh-huh.
the world trying to find out what programs are offering services that would improve healthcare, particularly for young Australians. She's from
Mhm.
Australia and had a grant from the Churchill grant from Australia. So I think the young folks a lot. I think there's also going to be a lot more publications. There's going to be a lot more conferences, more training. At the conference in Rome, there was a woman who gave a very interesting presentation about the publications. And she said it's very important who quotes who and who cites who. And it came out very clearly that it's very important for us to publish not just in the books on single session therapy where we speak to each other, but to let the rest of the world know
Oh,
about it.
yes.
And to do that, we need to publish in the regular journals. There was an article in 2018 uh, talked about me and Moshe in the Oprah magazine. And it had 2.5 million readers every month, at least 2.5 million subscriptions every month. Just a little short article, but it was called One and Done, Targeted Therapy. But, consider going and talk to somebody once. They may help you enough that you don't need to make it a regular expensive. That did more to publicize single session therapy than anything I'm ever going to publish in all my little books here on the floor. I think there's got to be more research. And the single session frame is perfect because it's an hour or an hour and a half long. It's not 3 years or 12 sessions or 90 sessions. And so what therapy works best for which kind of problems? What actually happens? What are the so-called active ingredients? Is single session therapy different than just doing the first session of an ongoing therapy? Does it help to prepare people before to send them a questionnaire? Does telling them you're going to do a follow-up questionnaire in any way influence how well they recall? I mean, there's a lot of questions, but these are research questions, they can look at. Uh, I think we're going to see more and more what you and I have been talking about, focusing on client strengths and abilities, doing what's right rather than doing what's wrong, sing the donut, not the whole, some of that. Uh, I already mentioned it seems that the single session stuff is certainly international now. When Moshe Talmun, Bob Rosenbaum, and I, 1985-6, did our little study with 60 patients and two moved out of town. So we had 58 patients. We did follow-ups and we found the majority only wanted the one session, and most of those got better and they had secondary benefits as well, ripple effects. Little study in Hayward, California, a suburb of Oakland, San Francisco. Who would have thought from such little acorns, big oaks, that we'd be having the fifth international conference and we'd be trying, there'd be websites and there would be corners and we'd be talking about it. It's taken off.
It isn't that a representation of single session?
Uh,
Like, isn't that
yeah, it
important?
ripples out,
Correct.
and uh, it's also um, Moshe has talked about this. We've all had this experience. He says, half the people he lives in Israel, but he's back near Tel Aviv, he's in Israel, and he says some of my patients are longer term or continuous or intermittent, but there's people I saw them, and then I saw their children, and now I've seen the grandchildren, and they come in for a couple of it. So it's intermittent therapy, perhaps throughout the life cycle, rather than one session and you never come back. So it's meeting people when they're ready, when they need something, right then. Strike while the iron's hot, that kind of an idea.
And the two things my mind goes to, we can maybe even end on this. Michael, we're gonna have to do a part two of this because
Oh,
I
good.
have so many other questions and so many other things. And
Yeah.
that's the thing that my mind goes to, you know, I remember Kirk saying about primary care behavioral health. He was like, I don't know what works about PCBH. He's like, what I think works about it, if I had to really put money on it, was that care is being delivered in the moment when it's being requested, that we're actually meeting people in that powerful moment of saying, yes, I'm looking for help. We're taking, we're amplifying that moment. And what you just described about intermittent care that's going to be throughout someone's lifetime, that's
Right.
primary care. Like that
Yeah.
is like the
Yeah.
essence of what primary care is supposed to be.
Um, Shakespeare covered this. Uh, he said one thing was the readiness is all. It's like
Yes.
strike while the moment's right. The readiness is all. When they're ready for it, they'll absorb it as opposed to I got to wear down the resistance. I got to, So one is the readiness is all. The other, he said, in All's Well That Ends Well, our remedies oft in ourselves do lie. Our remedies, what we need often is within ourselves if we can access it. Rather than somebody's going to fix me, a lot of times they may have they may have to help me find it in myself. But we don't cure people, we don't fix them. We create the situation in which they can help themselves. Milton Erickson used to say, treatment comes from the outside, but healing comes from the inside. And we don't really heal somebody. We create a situation where they can find what they need to heal. Sometimes we can reassure people, we can teach them things. I'm not saying it's just you already know the answer, why
Right.
bothering kind of thing. But I think it's getting back to the sort of the initial, like it's been such a shift, uh, and those of us, I love being smart and knowing a lot and having theories and having heard all the famous speakers and read lots of the, you can see a shelf of books behind me. There's 8 shelves like that up in the other side of my house and all that. But we have to recognize that it's it's the client. As Bob likes to say, Rosenbaum, maybe I think he was quoting Moshe, therapy is not about you. It's
Who would
about
have
the
thought?
client. It's not about the therapist. And so I have a world of knowledge and I can quote things and I'm like a little professor, they call it in TA, a little encyclopedia. And I like knowing all that stuff. But what's really going to be helpful to this person today? And a lot of my patients, if I said, well, you know what Shakespeare said, they go, huh? Why is he talking about some dead guy from 5 centuries ago or whatever it was? Yeah, so I think it's. I would love to sometime have a part two. If you wanted to do that. Um, the book that I wrote, the most recent book. There's been many, many, many books I've edited and a couple I wrote, but I decided. Um, I wanted to teach, I taught a workshop a while ago. I may have mentioned it in the book. And I went home and I said, I'm almost done teaching workshops. I'm going to teach one more. And I sat in front of my computer and I taught the workshop to the computer. All my jokes, my examples, the whole, and I wrote it out. And then I kept expanding it. No, I should put in that case. So, yeah, there's 50 or 70 cases, which you wouldn't do in a workshop. And there's exercises and all that. So it was sort of kind of like, a core dump or data dump. I'm going to put it all there because I hope some of it will be useful. I've gotten it's only been out a couple of months. I've gotten very nice feedback. People say, wow, there's useful things. And Michael, I could hear your voice. There's times when I talk very scholarly and then I tell a weird little joke or I make a pun or I say, oh, now here I'd make a funny face or that kind of thing. And so yeah, I hope people will take a look at it. I'm not trying to sell books. Actually, I am
Not
trying to sell books, but it's not that I'm going to make a bunch of money selling books, but rather I'm hoping that if people look in the book, they will find things that will help them help people, and that was really the purpose of it. Much more than just trying to sell a book or something
as
like
I put in the, and again, I'll in the description of this video will be a link to the book. And as I emailed Michael about, it was tough to even, like highlight and turn pages or put the pages down and mark things because it was just like the whole book, like the whole. I wish I had it.
that.
It's at my house right now, but literally every single page is turned, every single thing is marked. It's like hell yes, it really is. And I really appreciate what you said there because it read
Yeah.
that way, like a very much a conversation of having and very practical tips, the research that's
Okay.
interwoven within it. It was an incredible, incredible book. And I'm excited for that other one too that you just said, the why one at a
Oh,
time mind.
single session therapies. Why? I'll send you the information. But single
Yeah.
session therapies. Why and how one at a time mindsets are effective. It's in 2023 in Rome. It was the fourth international conference, and the conference directors, his last name is Canistra, Flavio Canistra, and the book is edited by Canistra and Hoyt. It's a Rutledge book, and so it's the main papers from the conference, and then. I don't know if I should confess this, but there were some other papers that we got to put it in. We got to put it. We got to invite. Oh, we did. They weren't at the conference, but they should be in it. And so the book got thicker and thicker. It's really good. And then the publisher said to us, when we made the contract, we were going to charge so much for the book, and it was going to be 250 pages, but now it's 370 pages, and you're kind of pricing yourself out. And Flavio and I said, uh, we'll cut our royalties in half. We want the book to be the book. So don't worry about it. Send us whatever money. We're not going to get rich anyhow. But I think it's really it's quite a wonderful book. The cover of the book is this.
Oh,
And if you look in the over my shoulder, you can see the same thing. There's a little that's the original of it. And if you were to meet my 37-year-old son and look at the back of his neck, he has a tattoo of the same thing on his neck. Seems a little odd to me, but but anyhow, yeah. But the idea of this particular symbol was it's a sumi, like a Japanese ink brush drawing, is that it's spontaneous, it's original, each one's different, it's complete but open. More can happen down the road. It's the idea of a single session. Uh, uh,
you want to talk about how you were saying before about these moments that just align and stuff. On
yeah,
my fridge at home is that symbol. I had a friend leave me a note with that symbol and a quote about the friendship will never end and it's always kind of
yeah.
evolving. So I tell you what,
Oh,
again,
lovely.
I love when the universe works out that way.
Great minds run alike.
That's right. That's right. Well, hey, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I will look forward to seeing you on video, at least in Chicago, and then sometime or other. I don't know if you and Bridget have any plans to come to the Bay Area, but Bob and I,
I know
and
it's been trying to get us down there. That's what I would love
yes,
to get down there, and we'll definitely visit. And this is another plug, and I'll put this information into the description as well. Is just for the fifth conference in Chicago, and I know things are filling up fast, but
yeah.
that's going to be a lot of great minds coming together. So I'll put that information into the description as well.
Yeah, I think that would be good. People can either go to Chicago, be there, which would be nice. We'll go out to dinner, we'll gossip, we'll talk in the bar and all that stuff. But it's also going to be available online. And if you go to the web, if you put in if you Google SST5/Chicago, here comes the program, the registration, all of that sort of stuff. And Chicago's a lovely place. But it'd be a good to be there one way or another. Some of the very best people will be online.
The lineup is incredible that Jessica and her team has put together.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I look
Arnie Slive and Monty Bobel and Jeff Young and Pam Rycroft and Jessica. I'll be there. There'll be a number of other people. Most of them I know, not, but I'm going to meet the people I don't know.
exactly. It's cool to see
Kind of
these.
fun. Yeah, it
Well,
feels good.
again, Michael, my gratitude. Thank you for today. I'm excited to get this out, and yes, thanks for everybody that stopped by to take a watch.
Very good. Okay, be
Take care.
well.